Imagine a world where empires stretched across continents, kings and queens ruled supreme, and technological marvels like the telephone were still a novelty. It was a time of optimism and innovation, but also one of growing tension. By 1914, this delicate balance was about to crumble. What followed was a conflict so immense, it would shape the course of the 20th century and beyond. Welcome to the story of World War I, the war that changed everything. The Powder Keg, rising tensions in Europe. Long before the first shot was fired, Europe was a continent on edge. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were marked by intense rivalries. France and Germany clashed over the loss of Alsace-Lorraine during the Franco-Prussian War. Britain and Germany competed in a naval arms race. And then there was the Balkans, a region often called the Powder Keg of Europe. This region was a melting pot of ethnic tensions. Nationalist movements were gaining momentum, particularly in Serbia, which sought to unite Slavic peoples under its banner. Austria-Hungary, with its diverse population, viewed these movements as a direct threat. All it needed was a spark to ignite the fire. The spark, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand on June 28, 1914, was not just an isolated tragedy, but a seismic political event that sent shockwaves through Europe. Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, had traveled to Sarajevo, Bosnia, with his wife Sophie, to oversee military exercises and foster ties with this newly annexed territory. His visit was intended to be a demonstration of imperial unity, but for many Bosnian Serbs, it was a provocative display of occupation. The Balkans were already a hotbed of nationalist aspirations and ethnic tensions. Serbia, in particular, sought to unify Slavic peoples, a goal that directly conflicted with Austria-Hungary's territorial ambitions. Within this volatile climate, the secretive Black Hand Society, a group dedicated to Serbian unification by any means, found an opportunity to act. Gavrilo Princip, one of its young members, was armed with a pistol and the determination to strike a blow against imperial rule. The assassination unfolded in a grim series of events. An initial bombing attempt on the Archduke's convoy failed, but a later misstep by the driver brought their car into close proximity with Princip. Seizing the moment, he fired 2 fatal shots. The killings were a catalyst for an Austro-Hungarian ultimatum to Serbia, a document so severe it was designed to provoke rejection. When Serbia refused to meet all the demands, Austria-Hungary declared war, confident in Germany's support. The political fallout was immediate and widespread. The assassination highlighted deep fractures within the Austro-Hungarian Empire, exposing the challenges of governing such a diverse population. It also set the stage for diplomatic chaos as alliances were tested and ultimatums exchanged. Russia, viewing itself as a protector of Slavic nations, mobilized in support of Serbia. Germany, bound by its alliance with Austria-Hungary, issued its own demands, escalating the crisis. Across Europe, public and political reactions varied. In Austria-Hungary, there was outrage and a desire for swift retribution. In Serbia, there was a mix of fear and defiance, while other powers like Britain and France scrambled to assess the implications for their own security. The assassination didn't just ignite conflict, it symbolized the fragility of peace in a world where alliances, grievances, and ambitions were tightly intertwined. What could have remained a regional incident rapidly escalated into a global catastrophe. The Domino Effect, alliances take the stage. Europe was a web of alliances designed to maintain peace but ultimately ensuring war. Germany backed Austria-Hungary while Russia supported Serbia. France, allied with Russia, joined the fray. When Germany invaded Belgium to reach France, Britain declared war. By August 1914, the world was at war. Millions of young men marched off, believing they'd be home by Christmas. Little did they know, the war would last over 4 years and claim millions of lives. The war begins. The Schlieffen Plan and the Western Front. Germany entered the war with a bold and ambitious military strategy known as the Schlieffen Plan. Named after its architect, Alfred von Schlieffen, the plan aimed to secure a quick victory by avoiding a prolonged two-front war. The idea was to strike fast and hard against France by invading through Belgium, circumventing the heavily fortified Franco-German border. Once France was subdued, German forces could turn east to face the slower mobilizing Russian army. However, the plan's success hinged on rapid execution and minimal resistance. Belgium, a neutral nation, was expected to yield quickly, but the Belgians resisted fiercely. Their defiance delayed the German advance and gave the Allies precious time to mobilize. Britain's entry into the war further complicated matters as British expeditionary forces landed in France to support the French army. The Western Front soon descended into chaos. By September 1914, the German advance was halted at the First Battle of the Marne. Both sides dug in, creating a network of trenches that stretched from the North Sea to the Swiss border. The dream of a swift victory evaporated, replaced by the grim reality of a stalemated trench war. Life in the trenches, a soldier's perspective. For the millions of soldiers stationed along the Western Front, life in the trenches was a daily battle for survival. These trenches were muddy, cold, and infested with rats. Soldiers endured long periods of boredom, punctuated by moments of sheer terror during enemy attacks. Letters sent home often revealed the emotional toll of trench warfare. Many soldiers wrote about the camaraderie they shared with their fellow troops, but they also described the horrors of constant shelling, the ever-present threat of gas attacks, and the loss of comrades. Diseases like trench foot, caused by prolonged exposure to wet conditions, and outbreaks of influenza added to the misery. Despite these challenges, soldiers found ways to maintain morale, singing songs, sharing stories, and dreaming of home. New weapons of war, changing the battlefield. World War I marked a turning point in military technology. Traditional tactics were rendered obsolete by the introduction of new weapons, transforming the battlefield into a deadly landscape. Tanks, introduced by the British in 1916, were a response to the static nature of trench warfare. These armored vehicles could cross difficult terrain and break through enemy lines, though early models were slow and prone to mechanical failure. The skies also became a new front for battle. Airplanes, initially used for reconnaissance, evolved into tools for aerial combat and bombing. Machine guns, flamethrowers, and poison gas added to the war's lethality, forcing armies to develop protective measures like gas masks. The Eastern Front, a different struggle. While the Western Front was mired in trench warfare, the Eastern Front presented a more fluid and dynamic struggle. Here, the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary, faced the vast but underprepared Russian army. The early stages of the war saw significant victories for the Central Powers. The Battle of Tannenberg in 1914 was a crushing defeat for Russia, with German forces capturing tens of thousands of Russian troops. However, the vastness of the Eastern Front meant that victories were often followed by exhausting retreats. The civilian population suffered immensely. Entire villages were displaced, and food shortages became widespread. Meanwhile, internal strife within Russia, fueled by the war's hardships, set the stage for the Bolshevik Revolution. The United States joins the war. In 1917, the United States entered the war, a decision that would prove decisive. The sinking of the Lusitania, unrestricted submarine warfare by Germany, and the interception of the Zimmermann telegram, a German proposal for a Mexican-German alliance, all contributed to America's involvement. President Woodrow Wilson framed the conflict as a fight to make the world safe for democracy. American forces, known as the American Expeditionary Forces, AEF, brought fresh energy and resources to the war-weary Allies. By mid-1918, American troops were participating in major offensives, helping to turn the tide against the Central Powers. Their arrival bolstered morale and hastened the end of the conflict. The war beyond Europe, global impacts. World War I wasn't confined to the battlefields of Europe. It was a truly global conflict that involved colonies, trade routes, and resources from across the world. European powers drew heavily on their colonial empires to support the war effort. Soldiers from India, Africa, Australia, and Canada fought alongside their colonial rulers, often facing discrimination despite their sacrifices. In the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire's alliance with the Central Powers turned the region into a battleground. The Gallipoli campaign, for instance, saw Allied forces, including Australian and New Zealand troops, launch a failed attempt to capture the Dardanelles. In East Africa, skirmishes between colonial forces disrupted local economies and societies. The war also transformed the world's oceans into a theater of conflict. German U-boats threatened vital shipping lanes, leading to food shortages and economic strain, particularly in Britain. The use of unrestricted submarine warfare would later bring the United States into the war, underscoring how global trade and security were deeply interconnected. The colonies were not just sources of manpower, but also of resources. Raw materials like rubber, oil, and cotton were extracted to fuel the war machines of Europe. This exploitation often led to long-term economic and social consequences in these regions, including resistance movements that would shape the post-war world. As the war ended, its global impact became evident. The redrawing of borders in the Middle East, the weakening of colonial powers, and the economic strain on colonies planted seeds for future conflicts and independence movements. World War I was not just a European tragedy, it reshaped the entire globe. The end of the war, Armistice and Aftermath. On November 11, 1918, the guns fell silent. The Armistice of Compiègne marked the end of hostilities, but it was not the end of the war's consequences. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, imposed harsh penalties on Germany, including territorial losses, military restrictions, and significant reparations. While the treaty aimed to ensure lasting peace, its punitive terms sowed the seeds for future conflict. For many, the war's end brought relief, but also a deep sense of loss. Entire generations had been decimated, and the world faced the daunting task of rebuilding. The legacy of World War I. World War I was a watershed moment in history. It reshaped national borders, led to the collapse of empires, and inspired the creation of international organizations like the League of Nations. The war also left a lasting cultural impact, influencing literature, art, and politics. It served as a grim reminder of the costs of conflict and the importance of diplomacy. Though hailed as the war to end all wars, World War I's unresolved tensions and harsh treaties contributed to the outbreak of World War II. Its lessons remain relevant a century later as the world strives for peace. World War I was a turning point in history, a tragedy that reshaped the modern world. What are your thoughts on the Great War? Share them in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more fascinating history videos. If you're interested in exploring more about history, check out the links in the description below. I've included some carefully selected books, historical collectibles, and fascinating memorabilia that you might enjoy. Every purchase through these links helps support the channel at no extra cost to you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.